Came home for Thanksgiving to find the house completely dark. Not the cozy kind of dark, where someone forgot to flip the porch light. The kind where you stand at the front door for a second too long, keys in hand, because something feels wrong before you can name what it is. I'd driven 4 hours, straight from the hospital after a double shift. My scrubs still smelled like antiseptic. I'd been on my feet since 6 in the morning helping a 73-year-old man through his last few hours, holding his hand while his family said goodbye. And the whole drive home, I kept thinking about my grandmother's pot roast and how I just needed to sit at that table and eat something real. But the house was dark, and when I turned my key and pushed the door open, the first thing I heard was silence. The second thing I saw was my grandmother. She was sitting in her armchair by the window, the one she's had since before I was born, the one with the armrests worn smooth from decades of her hands resting on them. The lamp beside her was on, the small one, casting just enough light that I could see her face. She was watching me walk in, like she'd been expecting me for a while. "Grammy," I said, "where is everyone?" She reached over to the side table and picked up a folded piece of paper, held it out to me. I walked over and took it. My hands were already tired. My brain was already tired. I unfolded it and read. "Nora, we decided to do Thanksgiving in Aspen this year. Your uncle found a last-minute rental. Great deal. Grandma said she didn't want to travel. You're better with her than any of us anyway. We'll be back Sunday. There's a casserole in the freezer." I read it twice. Then I looked up at my grandmother. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not apologetic, not uncomfortable, almost like she was waiting to see what I would do with the information. "When did they leave?" I said. "This morning," she said. "Early." I'd told my mother 3 weeks ago that I'd be home for Thanksgiving. I'd traded shifts. I'd driven 4 hours. "Did you know they were planning this?" She tilted her head just slightly. "Sit down, sweetheart." I sat on the couch across from her. The house smelled like her, like lavender in the cedar sachets she kept in the closets. And despite everything, some part of my shoulders dropped. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Did you eat?" "I made myself a grilled cheese at noon. I'm fine." She folded her hands in her lap. "The question is whether you're okay." I didn't answer right away. The honest answer was that I was so tired I couldn't tell the difference between upset and just depleted. I'd been awake for almost 20 hours. I'd watched a man die that morning. And my family had left a note on the counter. "I don't know," I said. "I think I'm going to figure out how I feel about this after I sleep." My grandmother nodded. "That's the sensible thing to do." She paused. "There's actual food, not just the casserole. I asked your uncle's wife to pick some things up before they left. There's a turkey breast in the refrigerator, a bag of potatoes, green beans." "You planned for this," I said. She didn't deny it. "I had a feeling." That was the first night. I should tell you a little about my grandmother before I tell you the rest. Her name is Evelyn. No, wait, I'm not using that. Let me just call her Grammy, because that's all she's ever been to me. She's 79. She raised 3 kids mostly on her own after my grandfather passed when I was 4. She ran a small alterations and tailoring shop out of the house for 30 years. The kind of place where brides came in crying and left with their dresses fitting perfectly. She retired at 72 and still keeps a sewing machine in the back bedroom because, as she says, idle hands are a personal insult to her. My father too am a luxury, am a luxury, am a luxury, am a luxury, am a like a fixed point. Like furniture. She's there when they need her, invisible when they don't, and whatever she needs is someone else's problem to figure out. That someone else has always been me. I'm a nurse. I have been for 6 years, the last 4 in a palliative care unit. People ask me sometimes how I do it. How I sit with people who are dying. How I come back every shift. And I tell them the truth. It feels like the most important thing I know how to do. There's nothing theoretical about it. You show up, you pay attention, you stay. I learned that from Grammy. Everybody in our family took, and Grammy gave, and I watched that for my entire childhood and decided I wanted to be someone who gives. The problem with being that person is that everyone around you eventually figures it out. That Thanksgiving, while my mother was in Aspen eating at a restaurant because nobody wanted to cook, I was in Grammy's kitchen making a turkey breast with rosemary and garlic the way she taught me. She sat at the kitchen table and told me about the family of a cardinal that had taken up residence in her backyard and how she'd been putting sunflower seeds out every morning. I told her about a patient I'd had, who in his final weeks had become obsessed with teaching himself to identify birdsong. We talked for 3 hours. We ate at the dining room table with the good plates, just the two of us, and it was the best Thanksgiving I could remember in years. I went to bed at 9 and slept for 11 hours. The next morning, Grammy made coffee, and we sat on her back porch in our coats. It was cold, but neither of us wanted to come inside. And she said, "Tell me about your life. Not the nursing, the rest of it." So I told her. I told her that I'd broken up with someone I'd been seeing for 2 years because he'd made it clear he saw my job as a temporary thing, something I'd eventually grow out of. I told her that I'd been looking at one-bedroom apartments because my roommate situation was ending, and I couldn't afford much on my salary after student loans. I told her that I liked my life, but that it was lonely sometimes in ways I didn't know how to explain to people who didn't understand what it was like to hold space for grief all day and then go home to a quiet apartment. Grammy listened to all of it. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't tell me it would get better, or that I'd find someone, or that I was still young. She just listened, which is rarer than it sounds. Then she said, "How long has your mother been doing this to you?" I knew what she meant. I'd been protecting the narrative for so long that I almost deflected automatically. She doesn't mean anything by it, she just doesn't think. But Grammy was looking at me with 79 years of patience, and I was too tired to perform anymore. "A long time," I said. "Since I was a kid, I think." "Yes," Grammy said. "Since you were a kid." We sat with that for a minute. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to just listen first, before you react. Can you do that?" "Of course." "I've been meeting with my attorney," she said. 3 times in the last 2 months. I've been revising my estate documents." I didn't say anything. I watched a sparrow land on her bird feeder and peck at the seeds. "When I go," she said, matter-of-factly, the way someone says when it rains, not morbid, just honest, "the house, the savings, everything, it's going to you." I turned to look at her. Grammy, you said you'd listen." I closed my mouth. "I am not a dramatic woman," she said. "I don't do things for effect. I've thought about this for a long time and I have my reasons, and they are practical reasons, not sentimental ones. Although the sentimental ones don't hurt." She almost smiled. "Your mother has a husband who makes good money and a house that's paid off, and she has not once in 4 years taken me to a doctor's appointment. You came home on a holiday after a double shift because you were worried about me. Those are the facts. I'm not punishing anyone, I'm being accurate." I realized my eyes were wet. I blinked. "I don't want you to think about the money," she said. "I want you to just be here this week and let me enjoy your company. But I wanted you to know, because you're always the last one to know anything in this family, and that's not right." I put my hand over hers on the armrest of the porch chair. Her skin was thin and cool. "Okay," I said. "Okay." That was day 2. For the rest of the week, I stayed. I'd planned to drive back Saturday morning. I had a shift Monday. I had things to do. But I called my roommate and asked if she could feed my cat, and I just stayed. I didn't analyze it too hard. I just didn't want to leave. Grammy and I settled into a rhythm quickly. She was up early, always had been. She'd have the coffee going by 7. I'd come down and we'd sit with our mugs and she'd tell me about what she was currently altering. She still took small jobs from friends and neighbors, and I'd tell her things I'd been thinking about. We watched old movies in the evenings. I taught her how to use the streaming service my cousin had set up on her television months ago and apparently never explained. She found a documentary series about tailors in Italy, and we watched 2 episodes and she had opinions about every single technique. On Wednesday, I took her grocery shopping, and at the checkout she introduced me to the cashier as my granddaughter, the nurse, the good one. I laughed so hard I had to step away for a second. On Thursday, she let me go through the back bedroom with her, the sewing room, and she showed me things I'd never seen. A wedding dress she'd made from scratch in 1987 for a woman who couldn't afford the bridal shop prices. Photographs of her shop from the 90s, the little signs she'd had hand-painted, boxes of thread organized by color so precisely it looked like an art installation. She talked about the women who'd come in over the years, the ones getting married, the ones hemming interview clothes because they needed a job and didn't have money for tailoring, the ones who just needed something to fit right for once. Every woman who came through that door needed something to feel right, she said. That was really all it was. I thought about that for days afterward. My mother called twice that week, the first time to check in, the second time to ask if I could look up whether Grammy's medication needed to be refilled. I answered both calls. I was polite. I didn't mention the note she'd left on the counter or the casserole in the freezer, or Aspen. I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. I wasn't sure I ever would be exactly. But I was starting to understand that my silence wasn't the same as forgiveness, and that those two things had gotten blurred in my mind for a long time. Sunday came. My mother's family drove back from Aspen. My uncle and his wife flew back from wherever they'd connected through. Grammy and I had made a big pot of soup that morning, chicken with vegetables, enough for a week, and I'd portioned it into containers for her freezer before any of them arrived. I was packing my bag upstairs when I heard cars in the driveway. My mother came in first. I heard her voice downstairs, bright and louder than necessary, the way she gets when she's performing warmth. "Mom, we're back. We had the most beautiful week. You should have seen the snow." And then her voice softened because Grammy wasn't responding the way she expected. I came downstairs with my bag. My mother saw me, and her face did something complicated. "Nora," she said. And then, with the easy revision of someone who never thinks she's done anything wrong, "Wasn't it nice that you two got to spend the week together?" I looked at her for a moment. She was tan from altitude sun, wearing a new coat I didn't recognize. She had no idea what the week had been. She had no idea what Grammy had told me, or what we'd talked about on that porch, or how many hours I'd spent in the sewing room learning things about our family I'd never known. "It was," I said. "It was really nice." My uncle came in behind her with his wife, and there was the usual noise of homecoming. Bags and cold air and everyone talking at once. Grammy sat in her armchair and received it all with the composure of someone who has long since stopped needing the performance. I hugged her goodbye at the door. She held on for an extra second. "Come back in a few weeks," she said quietly. "I want to show you where I keep the important papers, not the estate stuff. My attorney handles that. I mean the family things, the photographs, the letters your grandfather wrote me." "I'll be here," I said. She patted my hand. "I know you will." I drove home thinking about what she'd said on the porch. That she wasn't punishing anyone. That she was being accurate. I'd turned that word over in my mind all week. Accurate, because it was so exactly her. Not vindictive. Not dramatic. Just honest about what was true. For years I'd made excuses for my mother and my uncle. I told myself that my family wasn't cruel, just careless, and that careless was forgivable. And maybe it is eventually. But careless accumulates. Careless accumulates. Careless is what leaves a note on the counter. Careless is what doesn't think to call before booking a trip to Aspen and leaving an elderly woman alone on Thanksgiving. Careless is what forgets that there's a person in that armchair who spent 30 years making other people's dresses fit because she believed everyone deserved something that felt right. Grammy wasn't careless. She never had been. She'd just been in a family of people who confused her constancy with convenience. 3 weeks later, I drove back. She had the coffee going when I got there. The bird feeder was full. She'd been working on a skirt for her neighbor, she told me, a navy linen that was giving her trouble at the zipper. I sat at the kitchen table and listened and drank my coffee and felt something settle in my chest that I'd been carrying tensed up for longer than I could remember. After breakfast, she took me to the back bedroom and opened the cedar chest at the foot of the old guest bed. There were letters tied in bundles, photographs in paper envelopes, a small leather journal that had been her mother's. "Take your time," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." She left me alone with it all. I could hear the sewing machine start up in the other room, its familiar low hum, and I sat on the floor of that room for the better part of an hour, reading my great-grandmother's handwriting and looking at photographs of people I'd never met, who had my hands, my nose, my tendency to sit with my chin in my palm. When I came out, my eyes were red and Grammy looked at me once and went back to her work. "You okay?" she asked, not looking up from the fabric. "Yeah," I said. "I'm really okay." I meant it in a way that was bigger than the question. 6 months later, Grammy's attorney called me. Not because anything had happened to Grammy. She was fine. She was better than fine. She'd started a new project making quilts for a local children's hospital. The attorney called because Grammy had asked him to walk me through the estate plan, not so I would understand my inheritance, so that I would understand her intentions and be able to honor them the way she meant them. I drove to the attorney's office on a Thursday morning. His name was Mr. Ellison, a mild-mannered man in his 60s with a very organized desk. He walked me through everything with the patience of someone who'd done this many times and still believed it mattered. The house. Her savings. Not a dramatic sum, but real and substantial, everything she'd built over 30 years of her own labor and careful living. A small life insurance policy. And a letter she'd written herself. Not a legal document, just a letter in her handwriting that Mr. Noth Ellison handed to me in a sealed envelope and said Grammy had asked him to give me in person. I didn't open it there. I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened it. It was 3 paragraphs. She wrote the way she talked, no excess, everything where it needed to be. She said she was proud of me in a way that made me feel it in my ribs. She said she hoped I would use whatever she left me to build something that felt like mine. She said one more thing that I've never told anyone because it belongs to me and I think that's okay. I folded the letter and put it in my glove compartment. I drove to Grammy's house. She was on the back porch with her coffee even though it was February and 40 degrees outside because she does what she wants. I sat down next to her. "Mr. Ellison is very organized," I said. "He is," she agreed. "I've known him since he was new to the practice. 40 years. We watched the bird feeder for a while, a cardinal, the male, vivid red against the gray February sky. "That's the one," she said. "The one I told you about. He comes every morning." I watched him pick at the seeds with focused, unhurried attention. "Grammy," I said. Uh, 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 uh. Thank you." She didn't tell me not to mention it. She didn't say "of course," or "you deserve it," or any of the things people say when they want to minimize what they've given. She just said, "You showed up." And left it at that. My mother found out eventually. These things have a way of coming out, and when they do, they come out fast. My uncle called me, not her. He was more careful with his anger, and said he didn't want to get into it, but that he thought Grammy was being influenced, that she wasn't in a position to make these decisions clearly, that they should get an independent evaluation. I listened to the whole thing, and when he was finished I said, "She met with Mr. Ellison 3 times. She's been his client for 40 years. If you want to pursue that, that's your choice." He didn't pursue it. My mother and I had a harder conversation. It went long and it went in circles, and at the end of it she said, "I didn't know you felt this way." And I said, "I know. That's been part of the problem." She cried. I let her. I wasn't cruel about it, but I didn't take it back either, because it was true, and I had spent too many years deciding that my truth was less important than everyone else's comfort. We're still in contact. It's better than it was, in the way that things sometimes get better after the pretending stops. We're not close, but we're honest, and I've decided that honest is enough. Grammy is still in her house. Still has her sewing machine. Still has her cardinal. Last spring, she finished 12 quilts for the children's hospital, and they asked if she'd be interested in doing it annually, and she said she'd think about it, which everyone who knows her understood to mean yes. I visit every few weeks. I bring coffee, and I sit in that kitchen and I let myself be known by someone who has always been paying attention. I think about that week a lot. The week my family went to Aspen and left a note on the counter and expected me to be fine with it. I'm not angry about it anymore. I'm actually grateful, in the way that you can be grateful for the things that finally let you see clearly. That week, my grandmother and I found each other the way you find people sometimes. Not by accident, but because the noise finally stopped long enough to hear them. She showed up for her whole life. All I had to do was learn how to do the same. I keep coming back to the word Grammy used that morning on the porch. Accurate. Not kind, not generous, not even fair. Just accurate. Like she looked at 40 years of evidence and written up her findings. That word is what I think about when people ask me if I'm angry at my mother. The honest answer is that I was, for a while, but anger like that has a shelf life when you finally understand where it came from. My mother didn't set out to leave me behind. She just never developed the habit of counting me in. And there's a difference between cruelty and carelessness, even if the damage looks the same from where you're standing. What I understand now is that every relationship has a ledger, not a financial one, not a transactional one, but a moral one, the kind where what you actually do matters more than what you intend to do. Grammy understood this her whole life. She showed up to her tailoring shop every morning for 30 years, not because the money was great, but because she believed that what she did for people was real and worth doing. She made dresses fit. She made women feel like themselves. That kind of integrity, the kind that shows up even when nobody's watching and nothing's in it for you, that's not something you can fake or manufacture late. You either build it over a lifetime or you don't. I think about the version of myself that existed before that Thanksgiving. I was good at my job. I genuinely cared about my patients. But outside of the hospital, I had spent years making myself smaller and easier to overlook. Because somewhere along the way, I had learned that my needs created friction, and friction was dangerous. That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when you're taught early that the path to safety is accommodation. But it's also something you have to unlearn, deliberately, or it just keeps running. Grammy didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. She handed me some information and let me decide what to do with it. The decision to stop excusing the pattern, to say this has been going on since I was a kid out loud for the first time, that was mine. The hard conversation with my mother was mine. The choice to stay that week instead of driving home Saturday morning was mine. What Grammy gave me was permission to trust my own account of things, and it turned out that was the one thing I'd been missing. There's something I've noticed in my work with patients at the end of their lives. The ones who seem most at peace aren't the ones who accomplished the most or accumulated the most or were the most liked. They're the ones who were honest. Honest about what they wanted. Honest about what they could and couldn't do. Honest with the people they loved, even when it cost something. Grammy has that kind of honesty in her bones, and I think that's what I was really learning that week. Not just about my family, not just about the estate, but about what it looks like to move through the world with your eyes open and your values intact. I came home for Thanksgiving looking for pot roast and ended up finding something I didn't know I'd lost. It sounds like a small thing. One week, one old woman in an armchair, one envelope from an attorney. But the things that change us rarely announce themselves.